5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX Podcast episode number 21. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I've started this podcast because I believe that companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they hope to attract and retain talents. The podcast brings a different lens to the employee experience, a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to debate, discuss, and share best practices on the key components that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create positive employee experiences. One size doesn't fit all. What Airbnb or Google do around the employee experience may not be applicable in smaller companies. This is what this show is all about. Sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or a large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Laurence Vanhee, speaking with me from Brussels in Belgium. Laurence is a renowned keynote speaker, author, and Chief Happiness Officer at Happyformance, a consulting firm who pioneered the European wave of employee experience. Today with Laurence we will talk about how she revolutionized the employee experience in the Belgian government agency. And yes, it's possible to talk about EX in government. What she learned from her corporate and government experience and what led her to Happyformance. What are the key elements to happiness in the workplace and how to design a strategy to reduce burnout and bore-out among employees. We will also discuss the trends around employee experience in Europe and how building a successful EX strategy is as much a commitment from the employer as it is from the employees. This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital, and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. That's why businesses across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. For more information, visit fusionalliance.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes. You can open the iTunes app and type in Stefan Vincent or EX Podcast. And last thing, if you want to send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Very excited for today's special guest, Laurence Vanhee, calling from Brussels in Belgium. Laurence is the Chief Happiness Officer at Happyformance, a consulting firm which was a pioneer of the European wave of employee experience. Laurence, thank you for being with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So tell us a bit more about Happyformance and what your role is before we talk a bit about your background.
Happyformance is a Belgian consulting firm, and we are active in Europe and North America so far. I'm hoping we will extend it on the whole world. Our mission basically is to contribute very pragmatically to a better world of work. We are change and impact makers, and we try to transform positively the organizations. So we use strategies based on happiness at work as a leverage for a sustainable performance. We are sure that happy people make happy customers who are making happy shareholders or stakeholders. And my role, I'm the founder. and I kept a title that I had when I was working for a ministry, which is Chief Happiness Officer. So my job is definitely to create the conditions so people can choose within the organization the elements that will contribute to their happiness at work.
So let's talk a bit about your background, because you have a very interesting background. You've been in the human resources fields for a long time. You worked for a large supermarket chain, and then you worked for private companies, and eventually you moved to governments. And before we focus on one specific area of your career, what did you learn through your work experiences that led you to create Happyformance?
Well, you're right. It's already a long career. It makes me feeling me older. Well, I always worked in organizations that were operating turnarounds, always. And it was from hard downsizing to exponential growth. So I had very experienced both. And I have a background of business management engineer, so I always paid attention, even in HR, to the bottom line. And I always tried to make sure that I was developing frugal, meaning using as less resources as necessary, but also efficient, straight to the point, and in a certain extent, sexy strategies to improve situation and impacts. That's something that I learned a lot. It was really from this transformation, deep transformation. Then I also really quickly understood that people are not resources, that talents are not a capital. People are human beings, and they are human beings with experiences and emotions. And the more you make them live an enjoyable experience at work, the more they are performing. And the most important thing is that I have learned that if you take time and energy to co-create the solutions to the problems with the concerned people, you are able to maximize the potential of the impact, and you are acting on a long-term and sustainable basis.
And it's a very good point. You say co-create, which means a combined effort from the employee side and the employer side. Is it what you mean by that?
Absolutely. Co-creating is really, you do not force people to join and to adapt what you thought in and design in a management meeting, but you will co-design, co-develop the solution with them, and so they will be actor of the change, because they will be proud to make their ideas live within the organization. It takes time, it takes energy, but it is so powerful.
When we first connected on LinkedIn, one thing really caught my attention. You worked for the Belgian Ministry of Social Security as you said, Chief Happiness Officer. Now, what strikes me here is that the dichotomy between government and social security on one side and then happiness on the other side, and they sound antagonistic. Can you share with us what you did there and what successes you were able to bring to the organization?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, even the civil servants can be happy at work, and they have the right to be happy at work. And if they are happy at work, the citizens will be happier and will more enjoy the experience when they have to go to the administration to get a paper or to have some services regarding processes they have to fill in. So yes, I joined the ministry after a long recovery period due to a very deep and almost dramatic burnout. So I had all my career mainly in the private sector, including stock-listed market companies, and I was joining a ministry, a civil agency. So I can tell you that my friends were looking at me with very big eyes, like, she's one crazy. she took too many medicine. She's not herself anymore. But there were a huge challenge there. I have been hired as my official title was General Director of the Support Department, Personnel and Organization at the Federal Public Service Social Security.
Oh.
So, yeah, it succeeds, isn't it? So, my job basically was to be a human resources director, and my missions were to ensure the social peace with the staff representatives and to make the people adopt new ways of working. The ministry was one of the worst company in Belgium. Nobody wanted to go and work for them. But we have to have a social security. So this organization is really meaningful to Belgium. Mm-hmm. So they decided to go to a deep cultural and organizational transformations. And I joined them. They had already made a work environment transformation. They moved in new offices. They set up a couple of new rules. But there were a lot of stress and resistance. And so my job was to make sure that this change worked at the end. So the problem was, on top of that the HR strategy so far and the HR operations weren't supported neither these changes. So, yes, I was really a change maker over there. And I said, okay, if we want to succeed in what we do, we have to involve people. And we have to be sure that they can choose in the organization what will make them happy at work, and so there will be performance. And we redesigned everything, but all together. And we started with the point that people are adults, employees are adults, so we can consider and treat them as adults. And so we let them decide where, when, and how they want to work. And we, of course, ask them as well to be accountable for their choices and to be a leverage to their colleagues' performance. They couldn't be an obstacle to anybody by choosing wrong way of working. So this was really our motto, which is a baseline for Happyformance so far. It's freedom plus responsibility. Understand accountability. Freedom plus responsibility will lead to happiness for people and performance for the organization.
So did you see that when you worked for the government, that obviously there was probably a negative perception from the customers on what the government is able to offer to the citizens, but did you see a lot of pushback from employees on about the changes you wanted to make?
Yeah, from employees, from managers, from the staff representatives, from the politics, from the government itself. I mean, the highest representative instance in Belgium. We had the media against us. Well, it was us against the world so far. But we tried to develop initiatives and to monitor the results. And then we started to communicate about the very good results we were achieving. And so we have been treated of a fool, of a manipulating the figures. And then we communicated new figures a little bit later. And these figures, these key performance indicators, were even better. And so people started to say, how is that possible? How can you do so good results by decreasing the workspace, by giving less opportunity to people? And so, but it's the opposite. Of course, we have a completely different work environment. People don't have desk anymore. They just pick up a desk every morning, but they don't have their own office. But we share space, we share tools, we share furniture. We are just building a very strong collaborative work environment. And we started with the volunteers within the organization. We started with pilots, and we made the stuff sexy and attractive. And once you have a colleague who says to you, I've tried it and it's not that bad, and even it's good, and I'm really feeling well, it gives some motivation to the other one to test it as well and to try it and then to adopt it. So it was really a kind of positive contamination within the organization, and afterwards within the whole government in Belgium, because there are a lot of other civil agencies who are transforming now themselves on the same basis.
Were you able to tie the employees' sentiments of happiness and level of engagement to the performance and the delivery of the services you were providing to the customers or to citizens?
Well, first of all, to assess happiness, we just ask people, are you happy or not? It's that simple. But it's a courageous question because you're not sure about the answer.
Yes.
And then if they told you, no, I'm not happy, you have to ask why and what can I do to improve the situation. So what we also noticed is that when you feel good at work, when you are engaged, when you are motivated, you are much more creative. Yes. You take initiatives. You tend to improve the stuff. You tend to try new things. You are proud of what you do. So you have a higher levels of commitment, a kind of continuous virtuous cycle. And we really noticed it within the organization based on our own KPIs. But there are also a lot of academic works and private researchers who are showing exactly the same, demonstrating the same figures. Take a look at the annual Gallup surveys. Mm-hmm. They are all making clear the link between happy people and performing organization. Even on the stock listed market company and the price or the earnings per share, there is a deep link. We have in France a fund, a financial fund, who is investing in organization who are themselves investing in happiness at work. Last year, the market was minus 3%. This fund made plus 16%. So
wow, that's a huge difference.
Absolutely. Just only because we invest in people's happiness. It's just amazing.
It sounds like some European countries, such as Belgium, where you live and work, the Netherlands, and Sweden, for instance, have embraced the notion of happiness at work more than others. Do you have an idea why? I would add on this list France, Denmark, Switzerland, Luxembourg. I mean, it's a kind of contagious here, happy contagious system here in Europe. But that's true that for more than 3 decades, all the European organizations have optimized all their processes, just-in-time management, lean management, all those kind of philosophies have been maximized. And it was the same to the maximization of the resources. And those organizations forgot that they were working with people, with human beings. And now those people are just exhausted, literally exhausted. We have a numbers of burnout, brownout, bore-out, who are just booming. We never had such a high level. And it's a very long recovery period. So it costs a lot to the organization, but also to the society as such. And on the performance side, the figures are not that good as they used to be in the past when there was room for improvement. So if the organization wants to get back on a positive and sustainable track of profit or performance, this organization is now obliged to listen to its staff,
and to let them be actors of the transformation. So as I told you, it requires a lot of sincerity. Mm-hmm. You have to do it because you strongly believe in it, and it's not because it's fashionable for the moment. And it requires a lot of courage because it might be a strong analysis of who you are and who you have to do to be and what you have to do to fill the gap. And so pioneers like this Belgian ministry, I had the chance, and I was really lucky to work with, have shown track record that are admirable and that are admired too. And all the key performance indicators are growing up financially, operationally, and humanly, socially. And so as the media have made the propaganda of this new trend, managerial trend, happiness at work, it's like everybody wants to try it now. And yeah, it's a kind of tsunami here in Europe.
And I would say if a government agency can do it, then private companies should be able to do it all.
Yeah, that's a joke we have here in Europe. If Belgian civil servants have made it, anybody on the planet can do it.
I like you talked about burnout and bore out. It was the first time I heard of bore out, but I like the terminology. Mm.
I mean, bore out is just you don't find sense anymore to what you do. It's just boring, and you come and you do your job, and at the end of the day, you leave and you wait for the paycheck, the weekly or the monthly paycheck, nothing else. And it's really, it can be a sickness too, just because you're losing the sense of being useful. And so you lose recognition as well, and you do not feel as important, and you don't feel treated as a human resource, as a people, as a human being.
So let's talk a little bit about this then, because in some of my talks, I agree with that. I talked about the 20% paycheck suckers who just show up at work because they have to in order to collect their checks. Compared to the other, let's say, 50% who are just semi-engaged and the other 20% who are or 30% who are fully engaged. So anyhow, for those 20% who are completely switched off and disengaged, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel where they can be re-engaged, or should organizations completely forget about them?
The primary responsibility, I would say, is on the person herself. I mean, you have absolutely to ask you, why am I staying? I'm pretty sure everybody has talent. Sometimes it's a mismatch between who you are, what you can do, and the organization need. And so it's really your responsibility to ask yourself the right questions. But it's also the organization's responsibility to offer you space to reflect and to be guided, maybe to have a better career management, and to provide you training or job opportunities to develop your employability. But and we can do it. It's not necessarily a 6 months training project or whatever. It's just a couple of questions. What do I like to do? What am I good at? What do people say as positive on the positive side of my job? Why am I acknowledged within the organization or in the past? And what can I do to get back to this? And then to have the courage, once again, to face the reality, to have the courage to talk about this with your boss or with the HR department, and to take the right actions. It's really necessary. If you don't do it, you're just going and running to the wall. I mean, you will destroy your health. And you may destroy your whole life. So
you mentioned earlier that you work a bit in North America as well. And I don't want to sound too stereotyped, but is employee experience and workplace happiness more of a European concept because of a more social foundation of the enterprise versus North America, for instance, where it's mostly about pure capitalism and making money?
That's true that honestly there is a cultural difference. I mean, definitely social security in Europe is much more developed than in US. In US, you have what you have. It's at-will employment contract. You want to get out, you get out. I want to fire you, I fire you. There is no emotion behind that. In Europe, you have notice period, you have a very long process to go through if you want to fire someone, and even if you resign, you have to stay a little bit longer in the organization. So we have another consideration regarding the work, and even in US, a very deep difference, I think, is in US it's common that people have more than one job just to survive. In Europe, it's not hopefully the case for most of us. So in US, I have the feeling, unfortunately, that people are supporting much more stressful and awful work conditions than what we can accept in Europe. So that's one of the difference, I would say. But it's cultural, it's economical, it's linked to the labor laws and employment laws, I think. But it tends to be developed in US. You have the Google, you have all the startups in the Silicon Valleys where you can find games and slide band and stuff absolutely crazy. But to us in Europe, it sounds like very superficial, very how can I say?
Superficial.
It's cosmetic.
Yes.
You won't be much happier at work because you have a kind of a PlayStation you can play on. We can do much more than that.
So what are the major trends in Europe around that EX and workplace happiness space? What trends do you see?
I would say that now, if for the organization who dare to jump into the strategies based on happiness at work and a happy work environment, everything tends to be redesigned, taking into account some key topics: the user experience, and it can be employee experience and candidate experience. Yes. It's about giving and making sense. So being really pragmatic and sustainable. We have dynamic offices, like, as I said, nobody anymore has his own office, but we share office. We have a variety of furnitures, so you have always the best work environment to perform the task you have to do. You can work from home up to, for example, 3 days a week. So you have always 2 days for the social life at the office and to meet colleagues. We have flexible work time. We have flexible roles, so volunteering on internal projects, for example, and no more people who are dedicated to project without asking them if they would love to do it. You have the bring your own device policies, the bring your own technology policies. So we have as well a profound redesign of the leadership culture, moving from management to inspiring leadership, and that's a big shift. That's a completely different paradigm. We use a lot of collaborative platforms, in-house developed applications, expertise-based networks to connect people. And so the team, and no more the individual, is key to really make the success of the organization. So it means that we set objectives together, we assess and appraise objectives together, We make sure that we co-design processes, that we co-design the tools as well. And it's really about an agile collaboration and no more on praising the individual successes. So it's also speaking much more about ongoing monitoring and result-based management, so just to make sure that we are pragmatic and we are useful. It's if I would have to summarize that in a few words, and pardon my French, but it would be normal bullshit and politics, just the pride to work efficiently together.
Wow, it's a very different picture what I experienced my first 3 years of work when I was in France before moving to Canada and then to the US. It sounds like I may consider moving back to France. It sounds much sexier now than it was 20 years ago.
Maybe you should be the most welcome, at least in Belgium.
So I guess one question I was about to ask was, what are the 3 key elements any organization should think about when considering implementing an EX strategy? But I guess you at least talked maybe about a couple of key elements. The first is really that's collective efforts between management and employees to co-create, co-design what the happiness strategy should be about. Then there's the monitoring aspect to make sure that everybody is accountable on both sides, on the employee side as well as on the employer side. Do you see maybe 1 or 2 other elements that organizations may consider?
Okay, you have already said 2 out of 3 of my topics, so thank you for that. Maybe I would add sustainability, just to make sure that you are not thinking about the next quarter, but much longer than that. And definitely I would add, be sure that you will be courageous and sincere. Because if you're not, you're just fooling people, and you will create a mistrust within your organization that will damage your operation for a very, very long time.
And so what's the perception in Europe in general around happy workplaces? Is it something that is a bit like hippie, or is it just, as we mentioned earlier, just fashionable and it's going to go away in maybe 5 or 10 years? What's the perception?
Yeah, I told a lot about the unicorns, sparkling unicorns and caring bears. That was something that was frequently asked when I was interviewed by the media, by the television. I said, but are you living in a world of unicorns? I said, no. Honestly, no. If I have to give you the figures, the KPIs from the ministry, on 8 years, they have saved, it's for an organization about 1,000 people, so not that big, let's be reasonable, but they have saved almost $65 million accumulated on space. They have improved the performance by 20% at least. They have reduced the footprint on ecological base by 98%. We have decreased the reprography cost, printing cost by 84%. We have improved the turnaround. I mean, within the social staff by 75%. We have decreased the absenteeism by 26%. In 4 years, we became one of the top 3 sexiest organization in Belgium. We improved the morale by 88%. We had 1 out of 2 leaders who were women. You hadn't to choose anymore between being a mom and being a top manager. Almost 40% of the top functions were held by women. We had a level of spontaneous application which was unbelievable. It was unmanageable. We couldn't answer anybody, to all the candidates anymore. It was just crazy. So if you take in consideration those financial, operational, ecological, and human KPIs, no more any companies will tell you, are you living in a world of unicorns? They are just asking you, how can I do the same in my organization?
Yeah, I think that's a great illustration of what can be done and what the measurements and the results are. And again, I know that you have a hard stop in a few minutes before we get into more fun questions, but I think it was a nice way to summarize the whole discussion around the happiness at work and how you can really measure and drive success. And again, I think that the way to summarize it is, if a government agency can do it, anybody can do it, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
So before we wrap it up, let me ask you a couple of personal questions. At this time in the interview, I like to ask our guests some questions so that our audience can get to know them a bit more intimately.
Okay.
So the first question would be, if you were to invite a historical figure, who would that be and why?
Oh.
So if you were to invite that person to dinner, let's say, who would that be and why?
Only one.
Only one?
I would like a dinner with 50 people. From Jules Caesar, the emperor, Roman emperor, and Cleopatra. I would like to know more about this period. But as the French king, Louis XIV, for example, because I would also love. But I think the people I would enjoy the more an evening would be Leonardo da Vinci. If I could spend some time with Leonardo da Vinci, I would be, well, I could die after my life.
That could be very interesting.
Yeah.
What is the essential item you always take with you when you go on vacation?
But it's on vacation and on travel trip as well, and business trip. It's my pillow.
Oh, your pillow. Okay.
My pillow. I'm sleeping more than 40% of the time out of my home, so I always have my own pillow with me, because it guarantees you a better night.
That's a very unusual answer. Typically I hear about a book or a tablet. So the pillow. That's good. I'm
honest, I'm really honest.
So I guess that's a tough one for a European. What is your favorite food? And why?
I love food. I'm a food lover. I love everything. I mean, I've been to Bali on vacation, and I came back 2 weeks ago. I loved all the spices I discovered, all the herbs I never experimented before, all those fishes I never tasted. And after 3 days, getting back from Bali, I was in New York. And I love the Mexican food in the US, the way they cook it. You have very, very exciting fusion Asian food. So French food, of course. I love everything. Unfortunately, I love everything.
Well, indeed, you travel from Bali to New York. That's quite a trip. So before we end this podcast, what is the way for our listeners to follow you and Happyformance on social media, and if they want to get in touch with you?
Okay, so there is LinkedIn on my profile. There is we have a Twitter account for Happyformance. Another for Loft of Ease, which is also a company I have created, and it's an experiential workspace to unleash agile creativity from the team. So maybe we can make a podcast later on the influence of the work environment on creativity and collaboration.
That would be interesting.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Depending on the room they are working in, it has an influence on the results. It's really crazy. Then we have, I have a Pinterest account, an Instagram account. Maybe we can refer all of them if you want, just below the link of the podcast. So I would be more than happy to be in touch with your audience.
All right. Yes, I'll add those to the description of the podcast and the introduction. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. I know that you have a hard stop, unfortunately, and it was great to hear your European perspective on the employee experience.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stefan. And looking forward to communicating with you on a way or another, and to keeping on sharing the thoughts on the future of work, the future of HR, and to build all together a better world at work too.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.